Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Before we launch into the podcast, I'd like to tell you about my book, Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story. This is a book for people who are at a crossroads in life and want to make a fresh start. Judging by the fact that you're listening to this podcast, I suspect that you may well be one of those people. This book is going to help you to change your narrative and rewrite the scripts in life that are holding you back. This book covers the latest science and research showing you how to become the person you want to be and live the life that you want to live. I'd like to invite you to get this book not only because I feel it's a great book that's going to help you, but also it's going to support the podcast as well. I love podcasts, but sometimes all of those ads that you get can be really irrelevant and annoying when you just want to listen to a good piece of training or a good interview. So I therefore made the decision with my podcasts that number one, I wanted my podcast to be free so that everyone could listen to it. And number two, that I wasn't going to fund it through all these annoying and irrelevant adverts and commercials. Therefore, if you want to support the podcast and support all the things that I put out there for free, whether it be here on the podcast, my YouTube channel, other areas on social media, then buying a book is going to enable and help that process. So this is what we call a win-win scenario. By buying the book, you help to support my work and all the free stuff that I put out there, and you also get a really transformational book that's going to help you make those changes that you really want in your life. So if you feel you're someone who's at that crossroads in life, you're looking for a new direction, you're looking for a fresh start, then make sure you get this book. Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story is available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Whatever your preferred medium, it's there for you to go get right now. Hello, Story Changers, and welcome to the end of the decade. Today is the last day in 2019, and actually, depending on when you're watching this or when you're listening to this, it might already be next year. It might already be 2020. And at this time of year, I'm normally looking back on the year that's just been. And for the last couple of years now, I've done a reflective video, a reflective podcast episode, talking about my lessons from the year and sharing some of what I've learned, which will hopefully give you some advice or some insight or some help in the following year to come. And that's what I was going to do today. I was going to film another 5 lessons from 2019. And I actually realised that because this year's been quite a special year and a remarkable year for me personally and professionally, I've kind of already done a lot of this throughout the year. I remember that I did a reflective episode after my Author Your Life Summit in July. I also did a reflective episode after my wedding and honeymoon in September and October. So I've kind of actually shared with you my main lessons from the year, so I felt that it wouldn't really serve you to just repeat those in a slightly different fashion here on today's episode. So I thought, well, what can I do a little bit differently? Now, for the past couple of days, I've been filming content for my new 2020 course and my new Author Your Life Academy that's going to be coming out at the start of the year. So I've been in the film studio, as you can see, my home studio here. I've had the whiteboard, I've been drawing things, I've been writing things down, I've been teaching on camera. So I thought, what if I do something a little bit different? And instead of my 5 lessons from 2019, what about my 5 lessons from the 2010s? The 5 lessons from this entire decade. Because actually, over the last couple of days, I've started to think a little bit more to where things were in 2010. Certainly for me personally, who I was as a person, what I was doing in my life. Believe it or not, you might believe it, you might not believe it. In 2010, that was the year that I left school. I started this decade still at school. And so to look back to who I was as a school child, as someone who wasn't an adult, I started this decade at age 17. To look at where things are now for myself personally has obviously been a massive shift. But also collectively, looking at the national picture, looking at the international picture, things have really shifted this decade. And there's positives and negatives to this. I think this decade has seen a lot of really nasty, worrying stuff go on at the individual, collective and global level. I think we've seen some real bad shifts in this decade. There is some doom and gloom, and this doom and gloom I don't think is going away into the 2020s. But on the other hand, there's also been a lot of positive stuff. And for me, as an optimist, I think that the good stuff always outweighs the bad stuff, and I think it has this decade as well. And I'm convinced that some of the negative things that have gone on this decade are really just going to be fuel on the fire. They're going to spark some good stuff in the future, some big movement, some big change, and sometimes you need those really uncomfortable, nasty events, those challenges, those obstacles, those setbacks in order to catalyze that change. And actually that's a theme that's going to feed a little bit into what we're talking about today. So this is what I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you my 5 lessons from the decade, my 5 lessons from the 2010s. So let's launch into this. Each of these pictures represents one of my lessons from this decade, and the astute amongst you will have noticed there's 4 pictures but 5 lessons. So I've got 4 lessons for you here, and then I've got a secret bonus lesson right at the end of today's episode. So stay tuned for that. I'll be unveiling what that secret 5th lesson is. But let's crack on with what we've got so far here on the board. And we're zooming in right here, the top left, the love heart. And it's probably a bit of a cliched lesson, but really in this decade I've discovered the importance of love and the importance of loved ones. For me, a very seminal moment or a very critical moment in this decade was right slap bang in the middle, when, of course, as many of you know from All Through Your Life, this was when I lost my dad. It was pretty much exactly halfway through the decade, July 2015, and I can actually pretty much split my decade into a tale of 2 halves based on that event. Who I was and what I was doing before Dad died, and who I've been and what I have been doing since Dad died. And although this is the key critical moment for me that's helped me recognise the importance of loved ones and cherishing them while we've still got them and cherishing the time that we're gifted with them, I've also learnt this in lots of other smaller ways. As I said right at the beginning of the decade, I was at school and I had my school friends and I had my little social circle. And over the last 10 years, some of those friends have gone out of my life for various reasons. I've lost friends and I've regretted losing them. We've had some breakups and some fallouts, and then others have just drifted through the natural course of maturity in life. So there are some people who were in my life at the beginning of the decade who are no longer here now. But actually what's remarkable is the people who are still around, 10 years later. And for me and most of my friends, there's been periods of this decade where we haven't seen so much of each other. We've been leaving home, we've been studying at university in different cities, we've been working in different cities, we've been working in different countries. As I speak, I have 2 friends right now who are working in a different country, and that looks to be the long-term picture, but they're still in my life and they're still a part of my social circle. And what I've realised is that, yes, sometimes these moments in life happen and sometimes you don't see people as much as you'd like to, but you've really got to fight for that time and fight to make that effort. When someone in your life is important and someone in your life counts, you've got to prioritise time with them. And I haven't seen as much of my friends as I'd like to over this decade, and I'm still not seeing them as much as I'd like now, and I probably never will see as much of them as I'd like. I'd love it if we were all in the same city and just hanging out all the time. But that's not the way of life. We've got different aspirations, we've got different lifestyles, we've got different family circumstances with partners and spouses and family and siblings. So you can't have that perfect scenario of everyone being in the same place. It's not like Friends where you meet each other for coffee on your work break every single day, every single episode. Sometimes life is more challenging than that, but you make the best of it and you try to prioritize that time with the people that you care about. So that's another thing that I've learned, is that actually there have been consistent characters in this narrative of the last decade, and you've got to really fight for those people. You've got to fight for the time with the people who you care about. Now, of course, another element of love that I've had, and certainly a more positive one than that kind of sort of up and down statement there, is that actually I met my wife in this period. This decade, I met my wife at the start of this decade. I had not met her. I met her for the first time in 2011. We got together in 2015. And the second half of this decade has been really about cultivating and sharing the love that I have with her. And we finished this decade off in style. As I said, in September we got married, and I'm very much looking forward to the next decade, the 2020s, that I get to share with her and I get to experience with her. And so I've really felt that that's a hugely positive benefit that I've had in the second half of this decade, is I've had the presence of love in my life. And I don't think that it's much secret that I would say that I'm the happiest that I've ever been right now in my life. And there's lots of different factors that have fed into that. Being more comfortable and happy with myself as a person, finding fulfillment and purpose with Author Your Life, with the books and the speaking and the podcast. But another key factor has absolutely been that I've got the love of an amazing person in my life, and I get to share almost every day with her. And so that's my first lesson of this decade, is the importance of love. The importance of love. Cherishing the time that you have with your loved ones and really prioritizing that time. Creating those shared experiences, those shared memories with each other. It's a super cliche, I know, but cliches are cliches for a reason. If you don't have this in your life, if you don't have love in your life, then you're going to feel empty. You're going to feel that there's something missing. So lesson number one from this decade absolutely has to be loved ones. So let's move on to lesson number two. We've got the badly drawn, that is an artist pastel, in case you didn't recognise. The musical note you can probably guess, and that's my best attempt, a pen down there. And what this represents for me, lesson number two, is to express your creativity, is to go after creative projects. Again, if I go back to the start of the decade, as many of you know from sharing some of my personal story, I've wanted to be an author from an early age. And in 2010, I wasn't following that dream. I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I wasn't doing it. It was only in 2011 that I first started this. Some of you have heard the story with The Sims and the bottle of rum. It's quite a funny story, and if you haven't heard that story, well, I hope I get the opportunity to share that with you another time, perhaps in another episode, or if you come along to one of my events, or join one of my courses, maybe join in the Author Your Life Academy when it comes out. I'll share that story with you. It's quite a funny one, but suffice to say, I needed this moment of critical realization to go, why am I putting off my dreams? Why do I want to be an author, but I'm not sitting down and writing? And so 2011 was where it began for me. It took me a couple years, but by 2013, I had independently published my first book of a trilogy that never actually got finished. But that didn't matter, because it was all about just getting in the game, getting that book out, and I had the opportunity at age 20 to say, I'm an author. I had the opportunity at age 20 to say, I've realised my childhood dream. I guess the first couple books weren't that great. I had the 2 books of the unfinished trilogy, and the reason why I didn't write that 3rd book was I recognised that that trilogy was not what I was meant to write. What that trilogy was all about was getting me in the game, teaching me the craft of writing, how to sit down and put 100,000 words together, to learn the discipline, to learn the motivation, to learn the craft of writing. And that really set me up in the first half of the decade. So in the second half of the decade, I could start writing what I felt was really important, what I felt I was really aligned with. And in the second 5 years of the 2010s, of course, I published The Last 60 Minutes, I published Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story, books that you're probably a lot more familiar with, being part of the Author Your Life community. And these were the books that I was meant to write. These were books that I enjoyed good commercial success with. I got #1 on Amazon for both of them. I've had really touching and emotional messages from readers saying how much the books have influenced them, have helped them make changes in their life. Those are the books I was supposed to write. And the first 2 books were really just about teaching me how to begin to be an author, so that when the time came to write those books, I had the skill and the aptitude and the ability to sit down and make them happen. And I've had other creative projects throughout this decade as well. The books have been a big part of that. At that crossover, at the midway point, in my last year of university, I started thinking about setting up a holistic health business with one of my course mates. Now, ultimately, that business and that relationship didn't work out, but I don't have any regrets about that. In fact, I got a lot from that failed venture, because ultimately that was the catalyst of making me think about what I could do myself, what I could do as an entrepreneur, what I could do through the medium of business rather than through a conventional career. And that, of course, has led to Author Your Life. It's led to the company and the business that I have now. So that is another creative endeavor that has come out through the decade. I've been getting into podcasting right here in the last couple of years. Again, at that midway point, I was listening to a lot of podcasts and saying, wow, podcasts are great, I really enjoy these. I'd love to have my own one day. In 2018, the Author Your Life podcast launched, and that was another creative project that I was able to make happen. So I've learned so much about the importance of following your creative expression this decade. If you've got a book in you want to write, if you've got a business within you that you want to start, if you've got a piece of technology or innovation that you want to bring into the world, you've got to follow that and make it happen. Follow those creative urges. Creatively express yourself. You can't leave your dreams as dreams. There's no point fantasizing about that book. There's no point fantasizing about that business. There's no point fantasizing about that innovation, because someone, some group in the world needs what you have. They need that book. They need that business. They need that innovation. And if you don't give it to them because of your fears or your insecurities, saying, well, I'm not good enough yet, or I'm not the person to do this, then you're being selfish. You're putting your own needs and your own insecurities above someone else's needs. Someone out there needs your talent. They need your ability. They need your experience. Give that gift to them. Follow your creative urges. If you have one project for the 2020s, I want that to be your project. Whatever your creative expression is, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's design, whether it's dance, whatever it is, I want you to be taking that really seriously for the next decade. Because if you work on that creative expression for the next 10 years, you're going to be a master in that. You'll be a master in whatever it is you set your mind to for the next 10 years. All of those hours, all of those days, if you pour that into that creative endeavor, by the time it gets 2030, you will have something to show for that. But you've got to start now. You've got to start in this decade. So that's lesson number 2. Follow your creative urges. Then we're moving down here to picture number 3. The stick figure on top of the mountain. And this for me represents overcoming challenges. And actually how every challenge that is thrown our way, we do actually overcome. We do get through it. And I've learned this through a lot of different challenges this decade. I've mentioned one challenge already, which was my biggest challenge, which was losing my dad at a young age and having to come to terms with being without that parent, that mentor, that role model for the rest of my life and what I hope will be a long life from now on. So that was a big challenge, but I've had lots of other challenges throughout the years as well. I've experienced an eating disorder at the beginning of the decade. I experienced depression at the beginning of the decade. I've gone through financial difficulties of looking at the bank account and seeing a negative number in there. That hasn't been nice. I've gone through other family bereavements. This decade I've lost not just my dad, but I've lost my stepdad, I've lost my granny, I've lost my wife's granny as well. Not that I knew her particularly well, but obviously that had a real effect on my wife, the person that I love. So we've experienced loss throughout throughout this term. I had the breakup of what I thought was a good business and a good relationship. As I mentioned, that didn't work out. So there's been lots of different challenges throughout this decade, but ultimately what I've learned is that you overcome all of them. None of those challenges are still a constant right here on the 31st of December 2019. You always find a way to push through and to overcome and to persevere. And when you're in the midst of that challenge, it always seems difficult. It always seems like there isn't a way out or nothing's going to change. And it seemed like that in every one of those challenges that I've described, that this was just going to be a constant forever, and it was going to forever be a burden and a weight. But you know what? Every single time you push through. Now that's not to say that there isn't an element of pain and regret that can linger and can sometimes still be a part of your narrative throughout your life. There's challenges that we haven't yet fully overcome. There's been some time and distance that have helped, but there is still some lingering pain or resentment or perhaps a permanent change that's happened in your life. But we always overcome the challenges by the very fact that we're standing here, breathing, existing. That challenge hasn't beat you. It hasn't overcome you. You're still here. You're still powering on. You're still fighting. And that is something to be really recognized and appreciated. That you've gone through a lot in the past 10 years. We all have. There's no way that you can live for 10 years and never have a challenge in life. Never have a problem. Never have a stress. And as I said right at the beginning of this episode, that this decade has been a really weird and turbulent decade. There's been a lot going on at the wider level that has been really upsetting people. Things going on in our politics, in our environmental issues, in our social issues. There's been a lot that's been very upsetting and turbulent over this last decade. We've all experienced that. We've all had to shoulder that burden and shoulder that pain in some way. But we're still here. We're still existing. We're still fighting. And that is something, a strength, a fortitude that we can take on into the 2020s. That we always overcome the challenges that face us, even when it doesn't seem like that in the moment. And maybe right here, right now, you're in a challenge and that's exactly how you feel. Well, know that whether it's this year or this decade, you're going to overcome that. Keep that strength and keep that fortitude. We always overcome our challenges. So moving on to lesson number 4, the last of the pictures that I have prepared for you here today. This, for me, and I hope for you, the sun on the sea and the beach, this represents adventure for me. This represents exploration, pushing the boundaries, going to new frontiers. And this is something that I've done a lot this decade, and something that I've started to really embrace a lot more towards the end of this decade. As I said to you, 2010, I was still at school. I'd never lived anywhere else from home. I'd barely met anyone else in the world, apart from who was at home. But 2010, everything changed. I moved away from home. I was actually still 17 at the time. It was a couple months before I turned 18. I went to a new town. I started studying at university. And actually, that first year I found really difficult. If I'm honest, that's where my immaturity really started to shine through. That I did struggle for the first year, and that I wasn't mature enough to look after myself. I wasn't mature enough to live on my own and live independently. But you know what? You never will be ready until that moment happens. And that first year helped me and taught me very quickly. And in actual fact, that first year didn't work out. I didn't want to stay in that town. I didn't want to stay at that university. So I made the decision to change. And in the following year, I moved to a new city, a new university. That was the city of Glasgow. That was the University of Glasgow. And that's where I ended up staying. I found my niche and I found my place there. I went on, I completed my degree. I got that psychology degree halfway through the decade. So that was a new frontier for me. That was a new adventure. And I've had lots of these adventures and pushing the bounds throughout the decades. In that summer of 2011, me and my friends went on a hiking trip in Scotland. We went to the most remote pub on the British mainland. It's 30 miles away from any other settlement, any other inhabitants in the UK. That was an adventure, going into the wilderness, no phone signal, no nothing, just us in the country. It was brilliant, a fantastic trip. In 2012, I worked in America. I went across to Camp America. I worked in Jersey State, just outside New York. And there was me going to a new country, working in a new country for 3 months again, still by myself. I was only 19 at the time, and again, I wasn't mature enough for that trip, but going out there by myself forced me to be that mature. It helped me develop that maturity. In, well, where are we now? In 2016, of course, I moved city again. Me and my partner at the time, my wife now, we moved to a new city for work. We moved to Bristol, and I had a great year in Bristol. We ended up only staying there for a year, and then we came back. But it was a great experience of, again, going to a brand new place, a brand new country, only England, not that much different from Scotland, but still a brand new country, a brand new city. That was a new adventure. Been to a variety of places around the world, travelling, going to various cities in Europe, Amsterdam, Berlin. I went across to America again in 2016. I, of course, went to Experts Academy. Again, this is another story the All For Your Life community will be familiar with. Again, I just went by myself. I went on that pilgrimage. I was searching for answers at that moment in my life. And at Experts Academy out there in California, I found those answers. And that was really the birth of All For Your Life. That's where all of these ideas came from. It's where the Last 60 Minutes book came from. That was really a seminal and life-changing experience for me. And it came from following that sense of adventure. This year I've been going hiking a lot more. I've been going through the mountains and the wilderness of Scotland. It's been absolutely beautiful at times. We went to Japan for the Rugby World Cup for our honeymoon this year. I've had so many adventures, big and small. You can have an adventure just driving an hour away from where you live and going and exploring something new, or you can have an adventure going to a completely different part of the world, going and living somewhere else, going and working somewhere else. Even actually the business as a whole, All For Your Life, that was an adventure. That was pushing the bounds. I'd never run a business before. I didn't have a clue about how to start a business, how to operate, how to market. And to be honest, these are things that I'm still learning. I'm still learning in this process. And this is going to be my 4th year of All For Your Life now. I'm still learning so much about how this works. But I went on that adventure. I pushed the boat from the shores and I started sailing into that sunset. And that's something that I've really benefited from this decade, is having these adventures, exploring, pushing the bounds, going beyond the comfort zone. Again, it's another cliche. There's been a few cliches throughout this, but cliches are cliches for a reason, because there's truth in them. And certainly in the 2020s, this idea of adventure and exploration and push the boundaries is something that I'm really leaning into, and I'm going to have some more adventures throughout this year, some big adventures, and I look forward to sharing these with you over the next 10 years and with everything that I'm doing in All For Your Life. So you've got to have these adventures, you've got to explore, you've got to push the bounds, because you learn so much and you take so much from these things that you do. So here are the 4 advertised lessons. Here are the 4 lessons that we've got a lovely little diagram for. What's the secret lesson? What's that 5th lesson, the 5th thing that actually has underlined all of these? For each of these things that I learned, there's been a factor involved. And it's a factor that I've only really started to truly appreciate in the last year, I think. Literally the last year of the decade, I've started to realize this important lesson. This important lesson that underlies everything. It's been there subconsciously for me. But this year, I've really realized consciously how important this last factor is. And it's my 5th lesson to share with you today. This 5th lesson that underlies everything is luck. Luck. That is my 5th lesson. We have so much luck in our lives. And I'm not one for saying that you should just sit back and wait for everything to happen, that hope that that God, the world, the universe, whatever it is that you believe in, just delivers things into your lap. I really believe that we create our own luck in life through the way that we think, the actions that we take, how we put ourselves out there in the world with some of these things that I've talked about. When you put your creative projects out into the world, when you have adventures, when you face the challenges, when you share everything with loved ones, these things all help to create luck in our lives, and I'm a big fan of creating luck. There's a wonderful expression that I love: the harder we try, the luckier we get. And this is something that I've found so true throughout all of this, is that you make so much of your own luck. And I actually consider myself to be a very lucky person, because I've created a lot of my own luck through the things that I've done and the way that I've approached my life. But beyond all this is actually what we usually associate with the word luck. That sometimes we really just have good fortune, good grace, and we've done nothing to work for it. Sometimes we've actually done nothing to even deserve it. But that luck still comes into play nonetheless. And I can point to a piece of luck in all of these lessons. If we look at lesson number 1, love, luck. I was lucky that I met my wife. It was a completely spontaneous and random experience. I wasn't going on a dating app. I wasn't on Tinder. I wasn't trying to make my own luck. It was a completely random occurrence where me and my group of friends just happened to go into a pub on the same night that her and her group of friends just happened to go into the pub. And it just so happened that the pub that night was completely empty. There was no one else apart from our 2 groups. So we just happened to sit next to each other as 2 groups. And me and Kerry just happened to sit next to each other in those groups. And that's how my marriage began. And that was utter luck. There was nothing I did to work for that. And I could even argue there's not much that I actually did to deserve that at that particular point in my life. But nonetheless, luck came into play. With creative endeavours, with creative projects, there's actually a weird sense of luck that helped me to really establish myself as an author. My luck was the last 60 minutes. When my dad on his final day was lying in his hospice, I wasn't there with him for most of the day. I actually had to travel to get to his hospice room, and it was just luck that I arrived before he died. I arrived 60 minutes before he died, and with a couple of different variables in there, I might not have had those last 60 minutes. I might not have had that blessing, and certainly I wouldn't have had those lessons, and I wouldn't have had the story that came from those last 60 minutes that ultimately became the book, The Last 60 Minutes. And because I had those last 60 minutes, I was able to write a book where I could help people, I could show people what I'd learned through my experience. With just 60 different minutes of luck, I wouldn't have had that experience. I wouldn't have had that book, and I might not even be the person who I am today. I might still be eaten up by that pain and resentment and guilt that I wasn't there with my dad at the end. But my God, I got lucky. I didn't work for that, I didn't deserve it, but I got those last 60 minutes with my dad. And I'm so grateful and I'm so happy that that happened. And that luck led to that creative project. It led to the last 60 minutes. It led to that book that sparked things for me as a writer, and even actually sparked things with Author Your Life as well. And that was sheer dumb luck. Some people get that opportunity, some people don't. And throughout my sharing of the last 60 minutes and my sharing of work with Author Your Life, I've met so many people who weren't that lucky, who weren't there, they didn't arrive in time, they missed the opportunity to say goodbye to their loved ones. I had that luck, sheer dumb luck and nothing else. Overcoming challenges, again, there's been luck involved in here as well, where opportunities have come my way or things have just worked out. I've tried them and they've worked out. I can't even think of a specific example for this. There's just been so many things that have been lucky for me. When I was experiencing depression and I was low and I wasn't feeling myself, I was lucky that I had a group of friends around me who helped me feel really positive, who gave me those semblances of positive feeling in my life, and that was something that I fed upon and helped me to get over my depression. I just had the luck of the people that I'd met in my life. I hadn't worked for those people, I didn't deserve those people, but they were there nonetheless. There was luck in overcoming those challenges. There was luck in those adventures that I took. When I spent $2,000 on a ticket to Experts Academy, when I flew across to California, I had no idea whether that was going to succeed or not. I had no idea whether that was going to be good fortune or not. But nonetheless, it worked out for me. And even before that, the way that I discovered Brendan Burchard, who hosted Experts Academy, was sheer dumb luck. It was that person that I met at university, that person that I wanted to start a business with. And I didn't take many good things away from that relationship and that business partnership. But one thing I took was actually they introduced me to Brendan Burchard. And even though that relationship didn't work out, even though that business didn't work out, I'm grateful that they came into my life because I got the sheer luck of being introduced to that person, the sheer luck of finding someone who resonated with me, who captured me at that particular period of my life. I had the sheer dumb luck that I found out about this event happening halfway across the world, and I was able to travel there, I was able to experience it, and I was able to have my life changed by it. Luck, luck, luck. Remember that this decade. That yes, you can work on all these things, and absolutely I encourage you to work on all these things. Cultivate that love. Pursue those creative projects. Work on and overcome those challenges. Have adventure and exploration. And indeed, make your own luck. By the way that you think and the way that you act and how you respond to the opportunities in your life, you do make your own luck. But underlying everything is that extra level of luck. The good fortune, the grace, the divine intervention, however you want to label it. There's luck that we don't work for, there's luck that we don't deserve, but we still get it in the process. And I think it's really important to remember that we're all lucky people. By the virtue of you watching this, the virtue of you listening to this, you are a lucky person. If you have the technology that allows you to hear my words right now, you're in the top 10% of the world. You could have been born in the other 90% who don't have the opportunities, who don't have the gifts, who don't have the privileges that you have. You are lucky. From the moment you were born into luck. And that's something that I think is a really encouraging thought. That if we were born into luck, and if luck is a continuous character in our narrative, then where is that ultimately going to take us? What can the power of luck help us do? So folks, there are my 5 lessons from the 2010s, the end of the decade. It's been a turbulent decade, it's been a crazy decade, certainly for me personally and indeed at a collective level as well. I don't think the 2020 is going to be any different. I think this is going to be another crazy ride. I think there's going to be a lot going on. But you know what? We're ready to face it. We're ready to face the 2020s. If we go through as individuals and as a collective and we set intentions, if we follow what we believe in, if we work hard to make the change that we desire in the life, we've got 10 glorious years ahead of us. And we can really do so much in this decade. And I think this is going to be a really pivotal decade in the narrative of humanity. That's a big statement to make, but I really think this is going to be looked back on as a key historical period. You can be part of that history. You can be part of what happens next. It all happens right here in 2020. I look forward to sharing the journey with you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be. Because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.